Let's look at how the UDL guidelines are laid out and how you should approach implementing them in your instruction. First, there are 3 principles. Starting from the left, we have provide multiple means of engagement, laid out in green. Next, in purple, is provide multiple means of representation. Finally, in blue, is the last principle, provide multiple means of action and expression. The goal for each principle can be found at the bottom of each column. Now, within each principle are 3 blocks. These are guidelines, which are supported by individual checkpoints. All right, those are the 3 layers of information: principles, guidelines, and checkpoints. But where do you start? Well, the UDL principles are not given a hierarchy. Engagement doesn't outrank action and expression, but they are laid out in the progression of a typical lesson. You begin by engaging the students, then you introduce the content and skills required by your learning objectives, and then they perform some activity to produce evidence of having learned the content or skill. Granted, that's overly simplistic, but you get the point. Now, let's look at how the guidelines in each principle progress from one to the next. When we talk about engagement, we're looking at motivation. And in education psychology, we have 3 indicators for motivation: active choice, persistence, and effort. These indicators answer the basic motivational questions: did they choose to engage? Did they stick with it to the end? And how hard did they work along the way? The first guideline is all about getting the learner to choose to engage, or to actively choose to participate. So, the learner is engaged. What next? The learner is provided options to persist and give effort towards completing a learning goal or objective. Finally, we get to self-regulation. A self-regulated learner is driven intrinsically. They own and inform their own learning and need fewer external supports to actively choose, give effort, and persist when challenged. Make sense? Now for representation. This principle is aligned with the way that our brains take in, make sense of, and retain information. Take a look at this diagram. It outlines what researchers have dubbed the information processing system. According to this model, human memory has 3 components: the short-term memory store, working memory, and long-term memory. Long-term memory is our goal. We want the content and skills ready for use to solve novel problems, but we have a journey to get there. First, your senses are receiving information constantly, but only that stimuli to which you attend makes it to working memory. If you're not paying attention to it, that information is lost. So, learners need the information brought into focus to their senses so they can perceive it. This is the challenge of the first guideline of representation. Next, in working memory, our brain tries to make sense of what it's perceiving. The information has to be decipherable in order for us to have any chance of making meaning of it and storing it in long-term memory. For example, a printed word is, visually, a variance in contrast and color to the page it's written on. If we can identify that variance as symbols, in this case, the letters of the word, we have a chance of deciphering and understanding the information being conveyed. So, this guideline offers support for decoding words and symbols. Now, we make sense of the information, but is it worth retaining? Why should our brains hold on to this? Well, there are 2 main paths to retention: rehearsal and relation. And relation is by far the more efficient method of retaining information. When we can relate new information to existing understanding or make meaning out of our learning, we have a much better chance of retaining the information and using it later. The final guideline in this principle serves to help learners make meaning, tie the new information to existing understanding, and demonstrate how the information can be used to solve problems. The third principle demonstrates how to best facilitate options. First, you have to make the options available to all students for how they interact with the information, beginning with the physical interface. Next, you're giving students options for how they can express what they know. How do they want to solve the problem or communicate the idea? How do they want to demonstrate their level of mastery of a skill? Support for those options should be included because an option that isn't accessible really isn't an option. Finally, in the third guideline, you're helping students decide which option is best for them in each situation and to reflect on their performance. Well, that's an overview of the guidelines. Keep in mind that implementing UDL is a marathon, not a sprint, so don't feel pressured to take on every checkpoint at once. You'll dive deeper into each one in future modules, but we hope this video helps take some of the mystery out of what could be, at first glance, a rather daunting document.